Now, after over 2 months in prison in Baghdad, Brian Glendinning has been released. Brian was detained on the 4th of September on an Interpol red notice over a £20,000 loan with the Qatar National Bank. We're hoping to speak to Brian's brother John in a few moments' time, but first we can speak to Radha Stirling, who's the founder of IPEX, which is an NGO seeking reform of Interpol and the extradition process, and has been working for Brian's release. Radha, thanks for joining us this morning. First of all, how complicated was this case?
I mean, it was complicated by the fact that we had to, do a lot of campaigning and lobbying and settle with the banks and then get the respective countries working, Britain, Qatar and Iraq, to communicate. Now, we've seen many cases like this before, but in other cases, people have been arrested in countries like Spain or Italy or Greece, which is much easier to navigate. Iraq is, potentially subject to quite a bit of pressure from Qatar and would easily have extradited him. There was someone else in his cell at the same time for the same reason with the same bank who had already been there for 9 months. So to get, the outcome that we did in such a short space of time, I mean, we're absolutely relieved.
Well, we've heard from Brian's wife, who was saying that although he'd struggled, there'd been an issue with work in Scotland, but he had been making payments to the Qatar National Bank, and he'd been in contact with them through all of this, and therefore he didn't feel that he was going to be at risk by travelling across a border, even though there was money that was owing. Is this something that you've seen before, when there's when it's almost the debt has been cancelled, but it's still out there for other nations to think they're doing the right thing by picking people up?
Yes, Qatar National Bank has long used Interpol as a form of debt collection. They misreport debts under the category of fraud, which is a violation of Interpol's charter. But they're never sanctioned for it, they're never punished, and they never have to compensate the victims. Usually the first time the victim finds out that they're on Interpol is when they cross a border, and then they're not going to get pulled up when they exit Britain. And in Brian's case, he actually travelled by Dubai. There was no alert. But when he got to Iraq, he found out about it then. So, in fact, Kenny McCaskill, MP, and he's raised a question to Parliament. And what we're looking to do is get Britain to actually inform citizens that they're on Interpol if the notice is coming from an authoritarian state and if it's related to a financial crime. It would be satisfactory to British citizens. They would get the opportunity to be able to remove and delete that Interpol red notice before travelling, and it would prevent a lot of wrongful arrests abroad.
Well, Radha, I'm going to ask you to stay on the line because we do have Brian's brother, John, here. I'm going to chat to him as well and bring you back in if I may. John, first of all, presumably your first feeling is relief to hear that your brother's free.
Of course, really relief. It was Sunday morning to get the text message from our Iraqi lawyer, Mr. Detained. This is a message that myself and my family and close friends and community have been waiting for a long, long time. It was kind of my birthday weekend, so what else did I want for my birthday? What more could I ask for than my brother Brian being released?
Have you been able to speak to him at all?
Yes. Another thing that I've been dreaming about is to see my brother's name appear on my phone from his own mobile phone number. And I got that call on Sunday evening. We had a video call, and it was a very, very special moment for my brother and myself.
And how did he describe it? How's he been feeling? And I mean, presumably he was probably pretty scared by what was all happening.
Brian was terrified the whole time. Brian was even terrified up until 30 minutes before he was released. He put his T-shirt over his face because he's looked at the time and going by what he's seen happening over the last 9 weeks, he didn't expect anyone to be released that day. So he'd given up for another day, and that was him trying to sleep, only to hear his name being shouted 30 minutes later. And then for him to understand what they were actually telling him, he then jumped about with joy, fist bumping in the air, and a very special emotional moment for my brother.
Now, he works with BP and in oil and gas, so presumably does quite a bit of work around the world. Is he? Is this giving him pause? Has he even had a thought about the future and whether he's going to keep working in areas like the Gulf?
That's something that I think Brian will need to, first of all, come home and maybe fully understand what's just happened to him in the last 9 weeks and what's the impacts it's had on his wife and kids and his family. And I think we've still got a long journey ahead of us for Brian. But first of all, we need to make sure Brian's mental health's intact and stuff. So we'll be keeping a close eye. And I think decisions like this will be something that will be further down the line.
Oh, fantastic. Look, thanks very much for joining us, John. We'll go back to Radha now. John, you heard, Radha, you heard there from John just the impact that being imprisoned abroad can have on a family, the kind of the stress, the fear, the not understanding necessarily the systems that are in place, what's going on. I mean, it must be a time of really high stress for some of the people that you work with.
I mean, it's beyond stress. I mean, it's everyone's worst nightmare. It's a parent's worst nightmare when they hear that their child has been jailed, especially in the Middle East, obviously, and is potentially facing extradition to a country like Qatar with serious human rights violations and abuses. Yes, absolutely. I mean, the impact on the family emotionally is huge, but there's also the financial impact, having to pay usually around about the $50,000 mark for a lawyer to represent you in extradition proceedings, and all of the other associated impacts, the loss of employment. And in this case, we don't even know whether the Interpol Red Notice has been removed yet. So he even faces the risk of being arrested en route back to the UK. So we can't really rest until he's safe in the country and home in his bed.
Radha, one question occurred to me just as you were talking to Ruth there. Has this ended because of the World Cup? Is this the pressure of them wanting to present Qatar to present a good face to the world?
Well, this is one thing that we certainly lobbied, is with the World Cup coming up. We had the MP, Douglas Chapman. He actually attended the ambassador's offices in London and actually met with him and said, look, this is not good at this time with the World Cup. You need to make some diplomatic efforts to finish this case. And absolutely, without the World Cup, it may not get that kind of spotlight. They might not care as much about their reputation. Qatar has been really resilient to criticism over the years, and they haven't moved, even when there's extensive lobbying and media coverage. So I do think that's played a part.
But you've said how expensive this can be for people. Is Brian considering any kind of suit against Interpol or the Qatari National Bank?
We are certainly going to, as soon as he's back safe at home and rested, we're going to be taking evidence and statements from him about the impact. We have evidence from Qatar National Bank, and we want to take action against Interpol for allowing this on a continuous basis.
OK, well, look, thanks very much for explaining all of that to us. That was Radha Stirling there from IPEX, the NGO that seeks reform of Interpol.